The fall season in Brooklyn Heights was beginning to demonstrate its characteristic dropping of red, orange, yellow, and brown crinkly leaves. These falling leaves brought expected and unique scents as those leaves constantly floated to the ground. One or two sniffs started to do their magic on Travis by bringing forth images of Halloween, Thanksgiving, outdoor fall school term activities, and much more. Each major event brings a modified smell that lets one know what season this is. Amazing. Travis had the most persistent desire to jump into one of the piles of autumn leaves that people were raking and stacking daily. He enjoyed this time of the year, even if it was slightly depressing to see summer gone and winter arriving soon to dominate everything and everybody. As Travis strolled the streets, thinking about all these things, he noticed a movement in the leaves remaining on the oak tree limbs overhead. A closer investigation showed a barred owl nestled within them and sitting on a branch over his head. He remembered that Tiber appeared as a similar, if not the same, type of owl for his last lesson. That thought wasn't even out of his mind when the owl spoke.
It's my favorite student. How did you find me so easily?
How could I not? You are making a lot of noise up there. Also, why are you appearing twice in a row as an owl? Are you running out of original ideas?
Hardly. I didn't get enough chance last time to demonstrate how smart an owl I was and decided to make up for it to kick off today's lesson. Is that okay with you?
Sure, have it as you wish, Professor.
Then, a rapid array of hoots cascaded down from the owl, bringing about a significant amount of returned laughter from Travis, who started to applaud. Then, a bright flash of silver by a golden aura coalescing into a human form that was Tiber appeared. But now, instead of the handsome and dignified man dressed as an Ivy League professor, a man dressed as a Halloween goblin jumped down from the tree limb onto the ground before Travis. Travis responded with even more laughter but then said,
I don't think we will get much work done in this lesson if you continue this silliness, Tiber.
I have told you many times, Travis, that you must not make life any duller than you need to. A positive and light frame of mind is far more essential to a happy life than allowing yourself to be sullen all the time or even ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Tiber. You've made your point, and I will not attempt to not change you. Do whatever you want. I'll stand here and try to enjoy whatever you want to exhibit.
Tiber stood still, gave Travis a somewhat limited smile, and said,
That was amazing. You diss me while being charming and permissive, but that is still better than being rude. So I will cease my nonsense and get on with the lesson.
Then he morphed, with no fanfare, into a very well-dressed conservative professor from the University of Oxford, complete with a polished calabash mahogany pipe in his mouth. Travis decided not to comment on Tiber's last statement and said,
I would like to discuss the subject of prejudice today. It seems that way too many people in the United States practice that too much. What do you think?
I think that is an excellent subject, Travis. And it isn't just your country that has this problem of prejudices. Many nations don't appear to have much hatred of others because they don't have that many others in their country to act out against, but their attitudes are often the same, just on a smaller scale. Prejudice is a very complex subject to discuss because describing prejudice leads to many other connected emotional pathways. But let us start with determining what prejudice is. Do you recall a definition from your school studies?
Yes, I remember a lot of it. My teachers said prejudice is an unfair and unreasonable opinion or feeling, especially when prejudice is expressed without enough thought or knowledge. Perhaps it could be considered an unfair and unreasonable opinion or feeling formed without proper consideration. To take that concept a bit further, a prejudiced person might unfairly influence someone or a group of people so that an unreasonable social option or unfair community decision is the result. Any of those descriptions and far too many others to display here can be modified to cover blind prejudice, judicial prejudice, or any other offshoot of the same activity of looking down on another human or their leanings from a supposed position of being superior.
Tiber thought deeply of what Travis had said and, after taking a moment to consider these words, said,
That's pretty good recollection. You have presented a good enough, even if overly complex, description. That will allow us to proceed with a simpler and perhaps more enjoyable discussion of what a prejudiced person looks and sounds like. Okay.
Let's get started. Travis responded.
Tiber created a dramatic and far more exciting presentation to start their lesson. He quickly became a very unattractive-looking man without his typical brilliant auras, introducing a new character. He was overweight and dressed in somewhat baggy trousers, and those pants were being held up with suspenders. His shirt design was incompatible with his trousers, and his shoes hadn't seen any polish for a long time, perhaps even decades. And, of course, he needed a shave badly, making him look like a prickly pear cactus, and there could be no doubt that his breath would kill flies before they could even drift into his mouth. Tiber then created gray, cloudy, and non-solid-looking images of 5 more characters standing beside this terrible-looking man and listening to him rant and rave. There were 3 men and 2 women. Travis wondered why they looked less dense than the speaker, so he asked Tiber,
It's just theater. I wanted you to take my scruffy mangy man character more seriously than the others and created them as props so it didn't look strange to have this mangy man talking to the air.
Oh, okay.
The mangy man character, being displayed for Travis by Tiber, started ranting about other people who shared space with him on this planet. He had convinced himself that he was superior to them because of their skin color, cultural status, birthright, and smell. The more terrible things he could say about them, the better he felt about himself and the madder he got while raving. It was obvious that his adoring fans were also buying into his obsessions. It seemed to them that association with someone who felt so superior was going to rub off onto them, and they were all convinced that it was easier to kick others down several notches than to make the effort to raise themselves to the highest level that they could manage. Travis was fascinated while watching this display. He was well aware that such an outlook existed, but seeing it laid out in front of him was a lot more unnerving. Then suddenly, Mangy Man disappeared, and Tiber had taken on the persona of a well-dressed man who looked much like a current politician who had recently been President of the United States. The 5 gray, slightly out of focus people props listening to the Mangy Man were now replicating. Travis suddenly saw thousands of people, more or less, listening to this politician, alias Tiber. The crude talk that Mangy Man offered the listeners had turned into a different style of speech by this politician. He was telling those gathered that he would correct the inequality that the current government was bringing down on them. If elected, he would return equal treatment, at least from their perspective, to which they were entitled. They would be in charge again and not subject to the others who had diminished their lives by being and acting differently from the way they wanted. He said he wanted to make the country exceptional again, which would happen under his leadership. There ensued a considerable amount of cheering over the thought of this happening. Travis listened to this politician and at first didn't actually see what this had to do with prejudice, which was the theme of this lesson after all. He thought the politician was unpleasant, but that seems normal enough. Travis decided to ask Tiber. He grabbed his attention by interrupting and asked,
Tiber, excuse this interruption, but I want to know what this blowhard of a politician is doing, making excessive noise. And what has this to do with prejudice?
Perfect timing, my boy. I created those 2 separate scenes especially for you to see and to encourage you to analyze each speaker for their different slants on prejudice. The first man, the distasteful-looking man, was an obvious type of prejudicial-focused individual. What was your take on him?
Travis thought briefly and replied,
I was sad for this man because he was miserable and certainly wasn't pleased with himself. Looking at how unkempt he was in his appearance, you could see that he didn't know what he should or could be doing to change that. The man had surrendered to his weaknesses and, in so doing, began to take his resultant emotions out on others. He became a very prejudicial man because it was easier to be that, and he knew that others afflicted by those same inclinations would convince him that this was indeed the right path for him. But I somehow don't feel that this was the same inclination evidenced by the politician.
You're right, Travis. The mangy man had become prejudiced because of the many bad habits he adopted during his current and perhaps previous lifetimes. His failure to pull himself out of a crippled way of thinking was leading him down a bad path. He wasn't going to be content to keep his prejudices to himself, so he searched out others who felt the same way, and there were plenty of them for him to talk or interact with. The politician is similar but not the same. He may or may not have the bad habits and terrible character traits that create prejudice in the mangy man, but he learns to control that trait rather than be controlled by it. But he discovered that he could attract and control many of the prejudiced throngs and could create a large number of them to follow him and, in so doing, create a cult of sorts. You can see and hear that type of politician in my second man display. He successfully merged his internal prejudicial feelings with his out-of-control ego to create such a cult leader.
Tiber then rested, allowing Travis to issue another question.
Why were people attracted to these less than perfect men in both of your examples? Were they incapable of seeing the negative aspects of their offerings?
Of course they are capable of knowing right from wrong, but they had to use their innate senses and as well as their willpower to determine which course of action they should take in any given situation. This happens in every culture of the world, and as difficult as you may find this, it is a built-in characteristic in all sentient beings. It is a very effective aspect of learning a lesson, but failure to adopt and then to adapt to a positive stance tends to pull the weak into negative activity.
Travis then asked.
What exactly do you mean by that, Tiber? I assume you are saying that every soul during a life experience may be tempted to slip into a tendency for prejudice. They have to become aware of this tendency to act in a prejudicial manner and counter that with their willpower. Is that it?
Tiber replied after a short thought.
That is it, Travis. And although I know it's hard to believe that we must all be somehow vulnerable or susceptible to that tendency to be prejudice-oriented, and we should all be expected to recognize the wrongness that occurs in our prejudicial attitude and take steps to overcome it. That is indeed a difficult pill to swallow, but swallow it we must. However, prejudice of most kinds are unlikely to impact people as negatively as its cousin racism does. Prejudice refers to a preconceived idea about a particular group and their actions, while racism involves an unequal distribution of power on the basis of race. Negative prejudice is normally quite moderate in a person's projection in society, and in some cases, a prejudice can project a very positive attitude when the person feels strongly in their positive attraction towards something, such as a need to compliment others.
Tiber hesitated and then suggested.
But we're getting very heavy into the weeds here on the subject, and I feel that we need to provide some visual interest by going on a spiritual timeline venture. Are you up for it?
Absolutely, Tiber. Where are we going?
How about visiting a place you went to before and hated?
And before Travis could object, they were standing in an invisibility form in a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee in Germany during World War II, where a conference was taking place. The agenda that the 15 high-ranking Nazi party and the German government that was present were to discuss was the final solution of the Jewish question. As you were previously taught about this horrible time, Travis, the leaders of the Nazi party prior to this conference had already murdered tens of thousands of Jews and other civilians or incarcerated them in the unbelievably evil and cruel concentration camps. The leaders of this Nazi movement had given in to the tendency to accept their prejudices and direct them full swing into racism and other negativisms. Their intense feeling of disliking others on the basis of being different had evolved into fear and hatred, further justified on the basis that these kinds of people were not the stuff of Hitler's Aryan, which was of being a pure German race. The others, considered as significantly different from Aryans, were not able to be absorbed and therefore dangerous to the cause. With those thoughts in mind and becoming a significant part of the Nazi manifesto, most early camp inmates were German political prisoners. Then, the undesirables started adding to the social outsider population. They were Jehovah's Witnesses, other social outsiders such as beggars and the homeless, homosexuals, etc. They were identified after capture by SS-colored triangles on their uniforms so guards and other Nazi comrades could identify and abuse them accordingly. All during the Second World War, the concentration camps filled up with foreign prisoners from all over Europe until they far outnumbered German inmates. The Holocaust against the Jews had attempted to become equal in treatment by inflicting horror against all kinds of others. The final solution was underway. Travis interjected at this point.
I remember all too well what happened in these camps and throughout Germany, thanks to our previous spiritual timeline visits. By physically and mentally connecting us with those events while we are discussing prejudice and racism, I can see where this is leading.
I understand but hate having to visually experience this again. But it is far better to see this horror rather than have to live it. As you know, that is the point of education and experimentation, Travis. As you become more experienced in your lives and living, you should not have to immerse yourself in an experience to understand the importance of a concept to your evolution. It's what I told you when we first met. A human learns during his growing up phase that a burn can hurt you because a person learns that if a little flame or small burn hurts you, then falling in a roaring fire will hurt you exponentially. Humans are all smart enough to know that, but some are stubborn and require a more intense learning curve. This logic extends to almost everything that we eventually have to deal with. But now, back to the goings-on at this conference at the villa at Wannsee.
Travis was used to the fact that time was very fluid, flexible and managed by he or Tiber in whatever venue they were in spiritually. When they wished to take a more extended look at an activity or discuss what they were seeing and wanted to do that at leisure, time would stop. However, when they tried to analyze the activity in real time, time progressed as usual for the occasion. Travis and Tiber would see what was happening and understand what was said, regardless of spoken language. A spiritual control governed this talent called the Akashic Record. The Akashic Records are a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future in terms of all entities and life forms, not just humans. The Creator provided this spiritual tool for all souls during their evolution and to be used to promote that growth. It's very similar to our computer systems, but unlike the computer, It is unlimited in its usage and value to one using it. Travis became highly interested in the gathering within the villa. From the Akashic record, he automatically knew the names of all who were in attendance and what their participation in the Wannsee conference was going to be. The top representative of the SS was SS General Reinhard Heydrich, who was chief of the Reich Security Main Office and one of SS Chief Heinrich Himmler's top deputies. The remaining 5 men were also SS generals. The government leader at this conference was State Secretary Richard Freisler, the Minister of Justice. The SS and police had already negotiated agreements with the German Army High Command on the murder of civilians, including Soviet Jews, in the spring of 1941, before the invasion of the Soviet Union. The final solution was the code name for the systematic, deliberate, physical annihilation of the European Jews. At some undetermined time in 1941, Adolf Hitler authorized this European-wide scheme for mass murder. General Heydrich convened the Wannsee Conference to inform and secure support from government ministries and other interested agencies relevant to implementing the final solution to disclose to the participants that Hitler had tasked Heydrich and the RSHA with coordinating the operation. Travis listened to these men while they deliberated, the final solution of the Jewish question. He was quick to understand that this was no deliberation at all. They were not thinking about the question or, worse yet, about the end product of the deliberation. This was nothing more than working out the organization of arresting, mass murdering and the disposal of innocent men, women and most horribly children, who were proving to be a bother to the Third Reich. They had convinced themselves that these pesky people and all of the others who stood in the way of Der Führer, this was Adolf Hitler's grand Aryan worldview. Travis questioned the Akashic record, if these men felt remorse over their plans. The answer from the Akashic record was, yes. Great angst was present in their minds, but all of them said that this could not be a concern because they were devoted to the Third Reich and everything it stood for. They could not allow anything to stand in the way of Hitler's dream coming to be. Travis felt a tightening in his stomach and a feeling of not being able to breathe. Even though he was not in a physical body, he thought he might pass out. Tiber entered Travis' thoughts and said,
Now you understand why I wanted you to see this fine example of how influential a charismatic politician can be when they control a trait rather than being controlled by it. When he discovers that he can attract and maintain many of the prejudiced throngs and cause many of them to follow him, he creates a political cult that an autocratic leader is leading. There is no limit to the damage and grief that such a leader can cause. These men at the table did not deliberate whether the final solution plan should or should not be accepted, but instead discussed the implementation of a policy decision. None of the officials present at the meeting objected to the final solution. They benefited from the solution, whether they liked it or not. They had sold their souls, literally, and would eventually pay the price for doing so.
Travis regained control of his emotions and answered Tiber.
I do understand now, but I want out of here. The blackness of their souls attempts to penetrate mine, and although I know I can throw it off, I'm not too fond of it. Can we leave, please?
And instantly, Travis and Tiber stood on a snow-capped mountain with the most spectacular view Travis had ever seen. He somehow knew that they were on the peak of the Matterhorn, and the clouds were gathering below them and began to part so they could see the view of Switzerland for many miles distance. Tiber gently put his hand on Travis' shoulder and spoke.
I figured you needed something immaculate to look at after that dirty scene in Germany.
Thanks, Tiber. I needed this a lot. I have never known how terrifying and debilitating it is to be close to people like those Nazis who have given their souls over to evil. I'm just now starting to get my strength back.
Isn't that the truth? It never seems plausible that humans can demonstrate such a fantastic swing of character in a single lifetime. Look at this place. You can arrive at a locale where everything looks perfect, such as that village we can barely see.
Tiber was pointing to Zermatt.
It's beautiful, and everything looks perfect as those residents, including a constant flow of guests, move about the town. If it seems this perfect, it must be this ideal. Right.
I suppose not. You are going to insert types of men and women that we saw at the Wannsee conference into that perfect population.
Right. Sadly, that is the case, but it doesn't have to be that way. Each of those humans is, in essence, a perfect spiritual soul created from the consciousness of supreme consciousness. We're all waiting for the others to fully understand that so that every one of a simultaneous creation reaches its perfection. The entire family of that consciousness can ascend together. And that includes those souls you just saw failing in such a dramatic, awful manner.
Is that even possible?
It is, and it must be, and it will be. What supreme consciousness creates must ultimately succeed.
Well, that's encouraging, Tiber, and I, for one, will not stand in the way.
I am aware of that, Travis, and that is why we are performing these acts of friendship and spiritual evolution together. Not just because we love each other, but also because we are committed to assisting our spiritual family in reaching an ascendancy together and simultaneously.
But how is that to be, Tiber? There is a huge gulf of time and intent between us here in this realm. It does not seem possible to create such a merging of intent and happenings.
Travis, you have been instructed by me in a previous lesson that time is a perception, not a reality. Therefore, time is not a consideration in all this. Intent, however, is a reality of sorts. Each soul is connected with all other souls that Supreme Consciousness willed to exist in a holy instance. That specific act of creation created a spiritual family that must return to Supreme Consciousness together. And that return will be another holy instance as well. It will be similar to what happens when individual atoms work their way to becoming attracted to each other and start to develop energy fusion or fission. In the case of our souls, little by little, each soul within a connected family nearing ascension will start to be attracted to one another because they become aware of their common attraction of a return to Supreme Consciousness. Each soul's attraction to this ultimate return will begin with the increased attraction of all other souls that have not yet committed to the final rite of ascension. This growing attraction will eventually cause a cascade of all the connected souls returning to Supreme Consciousness of their own free will and desire. It does not matter how long in the perception of time that this process will take. It will take place eventually for all souls.
This descriptive intercourse manifested in Travis' imagination and caused him to become almost spellbound as he conjured up these potential happenings in his mind. Tiber realized that Travis was becoming confused and at a mental impasse over all this, and that required an imaginative resolution. Then suddenly, Travis found himself in another realm that was not Earth. There was no similarity between this planet and his. The color of the sky was a beautiful lime green, and there were no clouds in evidence, at least in his view. The sun seemed to be twice the size of Earth, but it was not quite as brilliant and didn't hurt your eyes to glance at it. There were 3 satellite moons of different sizes, but they seemed a bit etheric in their appearance in the noonday sun. Their distances were close, and not one of them was the size of Earth's moon. All 3 were larger. There were beautiful mountains everywhere and in every direction from his viewpoint. All the vegetation was multicolored and in various tropical textures and shapes. It seems that dark green may be the base color of all tree foliage and most leaves on shrubs, but the individual leaf colors reminded Travis of New England in autumn. Even so, the colors were far more vibrant than you would see on Earth. There were also flowers everywhere and on virtually every growing thing, masses of colorful trees and enormous forms of blooming shrubs and vines, no matter where you looked. As for the water features, they were everywhere, between the mountain features and uniquely formed lakes, ponds, rivers, and creeks. No matter what direction you were to look, there were water features. Travis looked over to Tiber and said,
"This has the making of an Eden. I have never seen such an orderly placement of mountains and water features, not to mention the stunning vegetation and flowers no matter where you glance."
The air temperature was also perfect, and you somehow had the impression that it never changed. Travis noted a beautiful scent that wafted over the garden they were standing in. His olfactory receptacles suggested a dominant scent of jasmine. Tiber smiled at him and said,
"Do you like jasmine, or would you prefer citrus?"
And before Travis could answer, orange bloom scents permeated the air. Then Tiber said,
"I suppose you are more desirous of Versace's Eros perfume."
Immediately, that wonderful scent enveloped his senses. Travis answered Tiber,
"That is wonderful. Did you create those scents, or are they simply there for the taking?"
It's a little of both things, Travis. These types of sensory attributes are sort of an advanced technology for the sentient creatures that live here. They have discovered this over many of their lifetimes and have been able to advance their ability to improve their talent to create and broadcast them throughout the community. The best part about that ability is that the scents are sensitive to the receiver on both "I love it" and "want it," or the opposite of "I don't like it" and "I don't want it." And they can both have it their way. And if you think that is wonderful, I believe you will like those who reside here.
And having said that, here are some of the inhabitants of Zeroda, which is the name of this planet. Travis turned his head and saw some figures starting to merge in the garden where they were standing. He estimated there were over 20 of them, mixed female and male, as much as Travis could tell. They were unique in form and not at all like the humans on Earth and yet, quite a bit like them. He thought this was a foolish thought, but it seemed to be an accurate one simultaneously. He decided he could break this description of them down, limb by limb, appendage by appendage, and what else, by what else, so he could develop a proper description to tell the folk back home. That is if he is even inclined to do that. Tiber knew what Travis was thinking and laughed internally at his apparent bewilderment. Travis glanced over at him and shrugged his shoulders. Then he looked at the people gathered and telepathically issued.
My friend and very smart student here is concerned about how to describe your appearance and then compare you with his earthly standards. Any ideas on this, folks?
Travis stared at Tiber, amazed that he understood everything being said, and more than that, it was obvious that the Zarathians understood it as well. Then he smiled and turned to them and telepathically apologized.
I should have known better. Tiber has taken me to new worlds in the past and explained how the Akashic Record stayed connected to us individually and filled in the don't know stuff as it occurred to us that we were ignorant of the subject. I have no reason to doubt this will happen in this situation. I'm sorry for not understanding that sooner.
The group still gathering in the garden were smiling and nodded their heads in response to Tiber's question. Then one figure, apparently a female and also apparently the leader of the group, stepped forward and directed her words, obviously by telepathy, directly to Travis and the others.
Welcome to Gerota Travis, and, of course, a welcome to Tiber, although he is no stranger here. My name is Scanza. We all know Tiber well and consider him one of our best friends. We have met him many times before today and have benefited from his friendship. And don't be too concerned about being unable to interpret what we look like or say. This lack of understanding is dealt with through the glory of telepathy, and the Akashic Record will fill in all that information into your mind to complete your comprehension of what you will experience here.
Travis looked at this woman and saw the beauty in her even though her appearance was not familiar to him by any standard. She was taller than the others, they were much taller than Tiber and him. She and her friends had skin that was very smooth and had a somewhat silken texture. It was like fur, but not especially like fur, but perhaps like a soft suede. Their eyes were spectacular, not only in their size but in their brilliant green gem-like shine. Even on Earth, we often say that the eyes were the soul's window. With these Zarathians, that was most assuredly the case. You could not exactly describe the emotional effect that looking at them had on you, but you could certainly feel that emotion.
Thank you very much, Scanza. That assurance will help me a lot. I am so pleased that Tiber has brought me here, even though I am not sure about his intention, but I have confidence in him that there is a good reason behind everything he does and what we do when we are together.
Scanza hesitated and then offered.
Everyone here to greet you knows the reason for this visit, Travis. Tiber had brought others here before you. In earlier times, he brought many of us from here to visit Earth and many other planet realms to visualize and experience other cultures. Tiber introduced planetary visits for the reason that would benefit us. And, of course, that is the reason for having experiences in the first place. And it largely because of Zenithians such as Tiber, that we are heading towards ascension soon before our return to spiritual consciousness.
Travis was nearly thunderstruck over the possibility of meeting with a planet of people nearing the possibility of returning to supreme consciousness.
And Tiber is of course a Zenithian, even though I know he hasn't mentioned it to you yet. And I am also sure he explained this subject when you first met and started your lessons together. All souls have been created to evolve, as dictated by life experiences, and then to return to the Creator as a complete, individual, and creative soul capable of adding to supreme consciousness and entering into the family of creators as an equal creator and not a supplicant. This fact is not precisely new knowledge for you, but the repetition and layering of each lifetime adds strength to the reality of spiritual evolution. Let us consider an analogy relevant to all planet realms. A tree's trunk and its limbs gain strength through duplicating and adding many layers of the tree's physical essence and attributes over its previous layers of growth. Adding layers increases every aspect of the tree's strength and growth sectors with each new added layer. The exact process of layering might be imagined when considering souls. The act of experiencing through many reincarnations layers each soul for the good or sometimes for the not so good, depending on the soul's intentions. Is that understood?
Yes. But that brings a question to my mind regarding those souls that layer up a lot of not so good growth during their spiritual evolution. If an entire family of souls is required to pass over to the ascension, wouldn't those lagging keep the entire family behind as well?
Yes and no. Tiber mentioned this primary matter during your lessons, but perhaps you have forgotten. But here is a different way to look at this subject. Supreme consciousness creates a family of souls. It is the intent that all souls within a soul family experience, evolve, and ultimately return to supreme consciousness at the same instance. This return to the source is inevitable. However, because free will is always an internal aspect of a soul, there will always be resistance by some souls to use it to go where and when the rest of the family goes. But at a point in a family of souls, when the overwhelming family is nearing the point of ascension, the holdouts will become spiritually overwhelmed by the others and convinced by the rest of the family to return to supreme consciousness. This can be likened to the formation of a black hole as the most phenomenal physical creation in the universe. A black hole is a region of space-time where gravity is so strong that nothing, including light and other electromagnetic waves, has enough energy to escape it in space. That boundary of no escape is called the event horizon. As a comparison, when the vast majority of a family of souls is nearing ascension, the spiritual tension vastly increases, just like the event horizon in an emerging black hole does. This tension will eventually convince reticent souls to reconsider leaving the ascension realm with the rest of the family and thereby return to supreme consciousness. But until all souls consent, no one can return. This fact may sound illogical, but it is reality.
Travis considered everything that Scanza had just said and responded.
Yes, that is what Tiber told me, but your explanation has added that other layer of spirituality onto my soul, if that is the right way to think about this. But what happens if one or more souls hold out and, using their free will, never want to return to supreme consciousness?
We don't know if that has ever happened, but such an occurrence might account for the stories in every culture about certain souls that have not returned to supreme consciousness. There are those tales on your earth about Satan and the like. The Gerothians have them too. That would indicate that these souls might divorce themselves from the supreme consciousness family. A sad thought, but that occurrence has not been verified by supreme consciousness for reasons not provided to us.
Travis, I sense certain thoughts coming from you about Scanza. You suspect that I have been her professor, as I am yours. But actually, she was my professor. The reality is that Scanza trained me through many of my reincarnations, and the reason that I introduced her and some other souls to our Earth realm was to show her and others how I was progressing in my spiritual evolution. She evolved and became a Zenithian long before I did, and is devoting her existence to guiding the Gerothians to the state of ascension preparatory to returning to supreme consciousness.
Wow, Travis exclaimed. I didn't even suspect something like that was even possible. I am so pleased to have someone who is Tiber's professor explain things to me. Thank you so very much, Scanza. I will remember this always.
You are welcome, Travis. Now let me recap everything so you will know why Tiber brought you here to discover and learn from. I am going to connect you and Tiber to my consciousness in such a way that you will all be traveling with me to whatever and wherever we are going to go to demonstrate the things I want Travis to know. Is that okay with you, Travis?
Travis replied it was absolutely okay. And the next thing Travis was aware of was being suspended high in the sky above a spectacular mountain range. He could not see any part of himself or anyone else and understood that this was a form of spiritual existence that he had not experienced before. He was seeing out of the eyes of Scanza, as was everyone else invited by her on this adventure. He was aware of her thoughts relevant to this meeting, as well as her sights and intentions just as clearly as if they were his own, but he was acutely aware that they originated from Scanza and not from him. He decided to ask her a question through this new form of telepathy.
Scanza, what is this wonderful and new, at least to me, multiple existences originated by your consciousness and shared by all of us?
Well, you have described it quite well, Travis, but this shared form of out-of-body travel is common in the spiritual community. It works only with agreement by all participants, as all spiritual life functions by such agreements, and individual privacy is valued most highly in every instance. But let's take a look at the values that relate to your reasons for visiting us here.
Then Scanza continued.
It all begins with the land that all souls are residing on when they are selecting a place to experience life in an obstructed realm. In that regard, Earth and Geroda are related. The four planet elements are earth, water, air, and fire. These elements are presented as mountains, rivers, lakes and ponds, oceans, and seas surrounded by beaches, landforms, mountains, and land in continents or islands. And each of these earth and water environments is inhabited by living creatures, plants, fish, insects, microorganisms, and much more. These living organisms exist and thrive because these obstructed realm planets have all the elements that encourage them to exist and thrive in a balanced, connected manner. It was all designed and implemented by Zenithians as directed and guided by the laws of supreme consciousness within each obstructed realm. The composite solution of all this is called nature, and all nature was designed to function by and for all of the living things within that specific obstructed realm structure, and it is continuing to do its part and thereby operate in a connected and balanced state. The sentient beings on Earth are called Earthlings, and the sentient beings on Geroda are called Gerothians. Both are living forms we call humans on both planets for simplicity. Is that clear to you, Travis?
Yes, was his reply, and Scanza continued.
Sentient beings such as humans must coexist with all other living entities within their shared nature. They are more aware and perhaps more capable than other animals, but they are not superior beings. The animals, other than humans, are guided by built-in instincts that assist and direct their lives and aid in their survival. Humans function by a less dominant instinct. They perform more by experience-driven free will solutions that are far more culture-dominated than the rest of the animal species enjoy. There is, however, a critical and essential connection between the free will and instinctive animal species. That connection even includes the elements that make up the physical aspect of the total obstructed realms. What's more, this connection has a lot to do with the balance that exists between everything used to construct the total of the planet itself when the Zenithians created the essence that is nature itself. As a planet evolves, every element within that planet will change, and those changes will alter the balance between all earthly elements. Still, the connection between all elements will attempt to create a balance upon those changes.
At this point, Scanza rested and waited for a reaction from Travis. She said, "But what do you think happens when a major imbalance occurs, Travis?"
Well, I assume that the planet will attempt to rebalance itself by a logical means of correction. The larger the change, the larger the correction. For example, let's suppose that a certain species, such as rabbits, begin to overpopulate an area for whatever reason, and that overpopulation begins to decimate certain food supplies that rabbits rely on, and that will begin to limit the number of rabbits that a given location can handle. Also, predators of rabbits, such as wildcats, would have taken advantage of the increased number of prey, and that increases the predator population until such time that the number of rabbits would start to decline. As the rabbits decline, the food the cats eat decreases, and the cats begin to decline as well because of the lack of prey. Is that correct?
It most certainly is correct. That description can drive us towards a conclusion about what other imbalances may take place. There will be some significant exceptions when you divert from biological to geological as well as to theological or religious matters. In the case of biological issues, the scenario you described will probably work with variations on your suggested solution. There is always a tendency for nature to effect appropriate changes in those matters. Geology is a lot more challenging to assess because the alterations are generally more dramatic and insolvable by humankind. Also, leave a resolution up to nature. You can rest assured that Zenithian manipulation will resolve the problem. Now, in returning to the negative human impacts on their imposed or overlooked changes to nature, it is because of their tendency for overpopulation, manipulation, negativity, insensitivity, etc. Bad or even catastrophic changes because of those actions by humanity have been the most obvious imbalance problems made by humankind in most of the obstructed realms. It generally starts because of ignorance of the fact that they are acting improperly and dangerously. And then, even though once it becomes obvious that they are to blame for some pretty bad things, they continue on because of greed, insensitivity, and simply not caring. It's an old story, an unexpected one, because most damage starts out being a fairly subtle bad act on the part of humans. And this is most unfortunate because the solution to the problem is relatively easy.
Travis was surprised to hear the thought about the problem being easy, used when the discussion was anything else but an easy subject. But as he pondered that thought, he received an answer from Scanza.
That's good or perhaps even excellent to question my use of easy in relation to discussing this subject. The possible global shattering issue of creating imbalances in your world is alarming, at least. But the reason that it feels so complicated is that it is a huge problem, and discussing it takes a group to discuss such subjects up and down and around because of the complexity of the issue. However, if you approach this subject from a single attitudinal point of view, the debate becomes easier, hence the term easy.
What is that single attitudinal point of view, Scanza?
It's empathy. That most important thought has synonyms such as kindness, sympathy, tenderness, clemency, mercifulness, charity, and many more terms that show the user of that characteristic understands and shares another entity's experiences and emotions. Empathy pertains to humankind, but it is relevant when considering animals and issues that impact sentient and non-sentient lives as well. When you approach any subject with an empathic point of view, it becomes imperative that you consider the needs and feelings of that subject and, therefore, discover solutions to dealing with them empathetically. That makes it easy, Travis, or at least much more straightforward, to find a proper solution for almost every issue with an empathetic attitude in control.
Well, that is easy, Scanza. I never realized just how important it is to be empathic. I used to watch a science fiction show called Star Trek, and they had certain characters that were essentially all empathic. I liked the characters and enjoyed the idea that you could be empathetic, but didn't realize how incredible an empath could be and how important it would be to be empathic when knowing how to approach solving problems with that talent.
That's right, Travis. It is the most important talent that humankind can have when approaching environmental, anthropological, and even geological consequences. Problems will always come about, but if humankind deals with these problems by truthfully caring about the consequences, a lot of good will come about by dealing with those problems with empathy. We, like all humans in obstructed realms, started by not conducting our relationships with empathy, and it was a disaster. We had wars, collapses of governments, starvation, and disruptions in every sector of life and livelihood. But as we progressed, became educated, and began to understand more about ourselves, with empathy as a desirable characteristic, we started on the evolutionary movement upward to where we are now. Empathy was not the only characteristic we had to adopt, but it was the most important one. But we can offer one essential statement to you. With empathy, you can solve most everything, and without empathy, you will likely solve nothing.
Thank you so much, Scanza. I know now why Tiber wanted to bring me here. With him, everything is a listen, and this was one of the best I have had yet. I also now know what I want my future to be as an adult. I am not sure specifically what kind of problem solver I will end up being, but I do know that empathy will be at the forefront of what discipline I will attempt. Do you agree, Tiber?
I most certainly do. What you do not know is that this was a goal you had set when we were last together in the transition realm, and you were attempting to choose a goal for the next reincarnation. I wanted you to come here and listen to Scanza, and that would help you in deciding in that regard. I feel you are on track to set a goal when we get back home. And thank you very much, Scanza. As usual, I have enjoyed our time together and think that we need to leave and get back to Earth. And as usual, we are only one thought away from each other and will be together again very soon.
Goodbye, Tiber. And to you, Travis, a special goodbye. I know that you will surely help lead your connected family on Earth to a better place as you evolve into a leader for them. Because of my Zenithian intuitions, I can tell that you are on the right track for that to occur.
Travis responded.
I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am for this tour you treated me to, and I give my thanks to all your friends whom I met earlier. Perhaps I can come back at some point to thank them personally.
There is no need for that, Travis. They have connected with us since you met them, but they didn't want to appear during our tour and require an interaction between us.
Then, all of them spontaneously appeared again and waved goodbye to Tiber and Travis, who had started to exhibit a misty glow, while they waved back to Scanza and the assembled Zarathians. Instantly, they returned in a pile of dried autumn leaves, where they had started for this lesson. Tiber smiled broadly at Travis and received a hug back from him. All of the autumn scents and the familiar feeling of a bit of a chill enveloped Travis. He said to Tiber,
That was a wonderful and eventful trip, Professor, but I am glad to be home. I guess that is part of the wonder of life. Sometimes you have to change locations, but it is always good to be home. Thank you very much, as usual. I believe I am better prepared to start to chart a course for my education and future from here on out.
Then, a hesitation on Travis' part.
But with your help, of course, Tiber. Of course.
Then Tiber reached over and hugged Travis and kissed him on the cheek.
But I think I will clock in a little owl time before I take off.
And with a triple trill of hoots, Tiber instantly morphed into the barred owl and flew onto the tree trunk where he originated. As he landed, he hooted out, "Love you." Travis returned the call.
Love you too, Professor. Hurry back.
Then, the barred owl flew off into the mist with a few more hoots.